All right. It's the golden age. So what I thought I would do is there were so many significant moments, I think, for consumers as well as for marketers and big inflection points that we saw really over the last 12 to 18 months. So to set this up, I thought what I would do is show a brief video that illustrates some of the concepts that I'm going to tee up next.
Anything that is that passion for something where you're into it, and there is a beauty to it, that profound sense of wonder.
And that big thing is that people need each other.
I think that's how we get through life. If you laugh, you can deal with it.
Love, it doesn't just hold. Love liberates.
Let it go!
Largest democracy.
Jews and Arabs refuse to be enemies, and with dozens more pictures and stories.
At the time when no one speaks, your voice gets so loud that everyone has to hear.
The most powerful force on this planet is human cooperation.
Stop defining each other by what we are not, and start defining ourselves by who we are. We can all be freer.
I don't show you that video at 10 a.m. to make you cry. Not the goal. But I think it's really important to understand that the technology helps us understand how people are connecting, how people are sharing, how people are discovering. And what's really important, what you see in that video that happened for the first time last year, I think there was two really significant moments that we saw in terms of consumer behavior and just how people were utilizing the Facebook platform. The first was the Ice Bucket Challenge. How many of you in this room took that challenge? How many of you, before the Ice Bucket Challenge, uploaded a video to the internet? Almost no hands. So we got people, and people became more comfortable with posting and sharing visual communication online. The second thing was World Cup. Like, World Cup just exploded. And it was easier and easier for people to keep up with their favorite teams and watch what was happening real time with the World Cup. So there's a couple big shifts and trends that we're seeing, and I think some of these will be obvious, and there are others that are much more nuanced. So first is the world has gone mobile. Some people say it's still going mobile, it's gone mobile, and I'll tell you why. The second is there's this real proliferation of single-use apps. A few years ago, I thought everyone would develop on HTML5, and that's the way that the mobile web would work. And we saw what happened as iOS and Android continue to invest, and we saw this explosion of apps. And the third is this move where visualization online is becoming the dominant language. It's almost replacing the alphabet. It's replacing text in many, many ways. So the first, the world has gone mobile. Has anyone been to this restaurant? Does this look familiar? Those with teenagers and those with millennials can probably identify. Here you've probably got a few Snapchats going on. Maybe they're on WhatsApp, posting something, a picture of their food from Instagram. They might be collaborating on homework as well. But this mobile revolution is real. And we've all seen the numbers. In late 2013, we saw digital consumption finally eclipse and pass linear media consumption. And if you look at the growth and the trajectory that's happening with mobile specifically, we think that those 2 points will also cross by the end of this year or early next year. And so these are a few numbers that I love. We all know there's about 7 billion people on the planet. Yet there's 7.2 billion SIM cards and mobile connections that are out there. 100. There are 100 countries in the world where there are more mobile connections than they're all people. 5x. The number of mobile connections is growing 5 times faster than the population globally. And in the last 3 years, smartphone purchases and adoption have increased by 92%. Devices are getting cheaper, connectivity is getting cheaper, and people are finally picking up mobile phones for the first time as their primary device. And so people say, well, is it translating into real-world success? Are people buying things on mobile? Look no further than Amazon.com this past holiday shopping season. Can anyone take a guess what % of their holiday shopping was actually done online through mobile? Numbers? 60%. Target in the US had 60% of their traffic come in through mobile this year. So mobile's here. The second thing is the proliferation of single-use apps. I love this one. Does anyone have an idea what this number represents? So this is the average number of apps that you would use typically on a weekly basis. Now, if I asked a few of you, what would this number look like if you're a teenager? Right? You would probably say 50 or 60. It's 28. If I asked you how many a 55-year-old plus was using on average, you'd probably say 5. It's 18. So there's not a big delta in any big age category or group, even across gender, where these two things divide. And the average number is about 30. And it's really, really interesting because I think what it says is people really prefer to have personalized, individualized experiences, and they have certain expectations of doing certain activities when they are in these apps. And someone brought up the point of authenticity earlier. Having authenticity and building creative and building formats and building content that's accretive to these single apps is maybe the most important thing that you can do. Because the expectation that a consumer has when they're in WhatsApp versus they're on Instagram versus they're on Facebook versus they're on Twitter is completely different. And I think you could probably all identify with that from your own user behavior. I don't have to tell anybody that messaging is absolutely exploding. The gentleman from India, I'm sure there is a lot of utilization on WhatsApp. Right? You go to Japan and everybody is online. Other markets, you see Viber, you see tons of this messaging exploding. And so from a Facebook perspective, we have been much more interested in figuring out how do we not only capitalize on this trend of the proliferation of the single-use apps, unbundling certain things like our messaging app out of our core experience on Facebook, because people expect different things. And as a result, we're seeing a tremendous amount of growth. WhatsApp just reached over 800 million users globally. There's 1.4 billion people now on Facebook. And Instagram actually has 300 million monthly active people on the platform now. And it's actually growing faster at this point in time than Facebook was during the same maturity cycle, which is pretty phenomenal. And so the last piece is that this visualization is becoming the dominant language in the way that people are communicating online. This new visual language, I think, it has really come from a few places. One, it's much, much cheaper to buy devices today. Just simpler to pull out your phone and point and shoot and then edit and curate. And so people are spending more and more time expressing themselves through photos, through videos, through emojis, I know that we all love and use. And we're seeing this play out. We did some work with Millward Brown last year, and I thought this was a really great quote from Jay. Jay basically said, Facebook's become way more visual. My speech patterns are the same, but I let the media do the work. So instead of talking about a movie, he finds a link and he posts that movie. Talking about the Ice Bucket Challenge earlier and looking at the video that I showed, one of the biggest trends that we're seeing as well is just the percentage change in video posts that people are doing. So globally, we've seen a 75% increase. And we're seeing these same types of numbers and increases across other markets around the world. So this isn't just a mature market phenomenon. This is happening in a lot of the emerging markets as well. This one's my favorite. There are about 350 million stickers that are shared per day on Facebook, and that's up 75% year over year. Someone put out an article yesterday that said 40% of every photo that is posted and shared on Instagram is also attached with an emoji. Right? So this is a big consumer behavior, and maybe not obvious to everybody, but it's something that people are very, very much doing today. Talked a little about Instagram, 70 million photos uploaded each day. And Newsfeed, in particular on Facebook, is seeing more and more video. And it's not because we want to sell more media or we want to sell more ads. It's really about meeting the expectation of the consumer. One of the things that I'm really proud about that we worked on at the company is we actually built an ads product for video that informed the consumer product. We had built such a great ad product that Mark stopped everything and said, before we do this for advertisers, we have to get this right for consumers. And it blew away our expectations. We thought people would be annoyed, pissed off, drop off. It would lower engagement, lower retention rates. It did the complete opposite. So much like the shift we had to make out of the desktop environment into the mobile environment a few years ago, we're having to make that same transition now in terms of meeting those consumer expectations and what kind of content they expect to be delivered in places like Newsfeed. So imagine this. You're on Facebook. It's 3 years ago. You're in Italy. You do a status update. What do you say? Wow, Italy is so beautiful. Last year, what do? Take your phone out of your pocket. You say, wow, this is a really beautiful cathedral. This year, what you're seeing more and more people do is take a video and try to give their friends and family and the people that they connect to and care about the ability to really immerse themselves in that experience. And so you can imagine a world in the not too distant future where your news feed starts to look like this. What happens when you bring in augmented reality? What happens when you bring in VR? What happens when you're able to have a truly immersive experience in your feed? There could be a day in the not too distant future where everything you see in your news feed is much more sight, sound, and motion. And this has big implications for all the marketeers in the room. How do you create this content? How do you target the right audiences? How do you drive meaningful value for the people that you're trying to serve? But it's really, really important. And so I think this is the conundrum, right? I talked a little bit earlier about this being the golden age of communications, and I think it's also the golden age of advertising. We all sort of reflect about 1950s Mad Men. I think over the last decade, it's been like all about the math men, to use a term from Sir Martin Sorrell from WPP. But it's really this blending of art and science that I think is allowing marketers to do things differently. And we're seeing brands being completely built out of thin air with very thin budgets and disrupting certain markets and bringing products to bear that really meet that consumer need. And we're also seeing some of the traditional brands doing really great work here as well. Did anyone see the America's Beautiful creative that ran on the Super Bowl? It was a great piece of film from Wieden & Kennedy. And one of the things that they did that I thought was really, really interesting is taking the power of insights, taking the power of targeting, and taking the power of sight, sound, and motion. What they did on Facebook is they used the same creative, but they cut the frames different way to talk to specific audiences in a way that was meaningful for them. So if you were of Middle East descent, if you were part of the LGBT community, if you were part of the US Hispanic community, they showed frames, wrote copy, and took that beautiful piece of content and just reoriented it in a way that people would like and would consume. And this proved to be very, very successful for Coca-Cola. So this isn't about going out and shooting a bunch of new content, doing things differently. This is about simplicity. Harnessing the power of insights, harnessing the power of targeting, reaching people at scale, and telling really interesting, beautiful stories. So I love this example. So the number one ask I get from marketers all the time is, how do I do better creative? Right? How do I make something cool on this tiny screen? And again, it's about meeting these expectations of the consumer. And so what we're starting to see is there's a lot of ways to be really playful and figure out how to design the formats that meet those expectations. And you also see other brands that are saying, you know, to heck with it. Like, we are not going to go launch our campaigns on TV anymore. I think everyone in this room probably saw the Jean-Claude Van Damme example. You know, this was made for the web only. Eventually went on TV, but this was made for the web. And people starting to think a little bit differently about how they're pushing and how they're taking those brands to market. We're starting to do a lot of ideation around this too. We're looking at different formats. These are just simple cinemagraphs, right? That allow brands to tell really simple, really elegant, kind of beautiful stories that wind up in somebody's feed. And really, like, you know, if you think about this whole notion of thumb-stopping creative, like, what's going to make you stop? What's going to get your attention? What is authentic in this environment? And I love these things, and you're starting to see brands start to play here a little bit more. And that's really our big ask. We want folks to play more. We want folks to invest the time. There's still so much opportunity. There's so many categories that still haven't been defined online. But reach the consumers where they are. Find all the people that matter to you, where they're discovering what matters to them. And we have to recreate this brief process. We have to recreate what people are trying to achieve. Because it's my belief that if you look at the traditional ways that we've been doing advertising for the last 5 or 6 decades, and you even just look at the word advertising, what it means, the Latin form of advertising means I am going to advert one's attention and take it somewhere else. I think in this multi-app ecosystem, it's about advertising where you have to add value. You have to be relevant in those contextual experiences. And you have to drive value. For us, it's not just about driving value from brands to build a business. We have to drive equal value for people. And we believe in order to be successful and in order to be sustainable, we have to give the world more value than we take. And that's inclusive of how we serve people and how we serve brands. And I think it's really, really important. This is the key takeaway. Authenticity is a piece. Targeting is a piece. Building great creative is a piece. But the foundation starts with the value. What value are you trying to create? What business objective are you trying to achieve? And that's what a lot of companies like ours and others who are taking advantage of the wave of the consumer moving to mobile, moving into apps, and usually using visualization online is really powerful. Thank you for the time. Thanks for the feedback on the squeaky shoes. That was fantastic. There's a few minutes. I'm happy to take a couple questions. And if you don't mind, take the mic, because I believe we're on live stream, which I cannot wait to watch tonight.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. How do you think the change in the aesthetic of looking at videos and moving to this potential virtual reality, how do you think that will affect what consumers expect to see in the analog world?
It's a good question. You know, I think what we're seeing is people are sort of, especially the millennials, are starting to say, like, I almost don't care what surface it's on. I just want it on demand and on the go. And so the need for quality content that goes across all these formats, all these surfaces, all these screens, I think the expectation is becoming more of the same. But I do think it's going to take some time for the folks, particularly if you're in the linear TV business, I think it's going to take time for them to adjust. Microphone coming.
I'd like to follow up on that question then. What do you believe the impact of the digital innovations that are kind of presented to people, mobile, tablet, on Facebook, what impact does that have on their actual in reality experiences when they travel to Venice, when they experience things in person?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So a lot of people have asked us, why did we buy Oculus? And for those of you familiar with Oculus, it's a virtual reality technology. And virtual reality has not been, it's not a new technology. But we believe there's a lot of applications for it that could help in the entertainment space and the healthcare space, and also just making consumer products much, much better. But the idea is that we want to give people deeper, more immersive experiences. And we will always test this stuff. There might be a day where we say, hey, this virtual reality stuff in Feed is not working, and do we need to put it somewhere else? So for us, it's all about test, 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 learn, learn, learn. And we also are very, very focused on just moving at a speed and a pace that keeps up with the innovation and keeps up with the consumer attention and demand.
Hi, good morning. You showed that 30 apps on average people have on their phone, right? And some differences between age groups. I just wondered, what are motivators for people to download new apps? It almost sounds to me that an entry barrier is emerging and people have their fixed number of apps. At least that's kind of what I understood from you. And so what drives them to download new apps?
I think, there's certainly friends and family. I think it's certainly around things like, if you're interested in gaming, there's a higher probability that you're going to probably have more gaming apps than, say, your friends. But what we're starting to see, too, is there's this whole notion of discovery. And discovery is happening in places like Newsfeed on Facebook. It's certainly happening in stream in places like Twitter. And so what a lot of the app developers, both game makers and e-commerce companies are doing is they're doing a lot of these advertisements that are geared to get people to download their app. And so they're paying, essentially to get volume and traffic into their app. The problem is there's not a high retention rate in terms of the frequency and the time at which people are using these apps. So a lot of companies, including ours, are developing retargeting options to say, hey, you've downloaded this app, reminder you haven't been back in X amount of time, and here's an offer, or here's something to come back. So I think the hard part isn't necessarily getting somebody into the app. I mean, you do have to cut through the clutter. There's millions of apps in iOS and within Android. But getting people to re-engage and use your app on, say, 5 to 7 days out of the week, I think is the biggest problem. So you're going to start to see more and more advertising sort of products, especially from mobile feed-based companies, to attract people to download more and more apps. Yep. One more? Great.
You spoke a lot about creating quality native content across different app platforms. What do you think the most important aspect of that is?
It's a really good question. I think that there is, we talked earlier about authenticity, but I think short, snappy, content that, again, is accretive to that environment. I'll use an example. If I was to shoot a video or post a photo in Instagram, I don't think I would use the exact same content in Facebook, right? And so there's really this beauty, and I think it starts with the brief and really connecting about what the brand is trying to achieve, right? And for a lot of brands, there might be awareness, there might be more consideration, it might be lower funnel, and it's about purchase. But what we're seeing in the video space in particular is that you have a lot of brands that are now still really focused on their performance, and you've got performance companies that are focused on the brand. So I'll give you an example, like CocaCola and that work, they want to know how many sales that drove. They want to understand brand metrics. At the same time, we've got King.com, who just produces a bunch of games, and they really want to know the impact on their brand. They drove a lot of sales, but they're also trying to build a brand. And so I think that's another trend that's been really, really interesting. Then everywhere we go, we're surprised when we talk to a direct response advertiser and they want to talk about developing creative for video and Facebook. And on the other side, we're talking about conversion with the largest marketers in the world who are typically doing brand advertising. Awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.